As we saw in the previous chapter, off-center midtones are very useful. They allow greater precision and variety for targeting your adjustments than just the basic selections. Also, because they don't include the black and white ends of the tonal spectrum like the basic lights and darks do, adjustments through off-center midtones can be used to protect highlights and shadows from being clipped when increasing contrast, and they can be used to achieve less loss of contrast when lightening darks or darkening lights. In this chapter, we'll look at the zone masks and half-zone masks. All the buttons in the off-center midtone section are based on the zone system. Zone system luminosity selections and masks were introduced in version 3 of the panel, but this newest version of the panel greatly expands their number, use, and importance. Understanding the zone system as it relates to luminosity masks will make this section easier to use. Ansel Adams and Fred Archer developed the original zone system for black and white film photography. They divided image tones into 11 zones from 0 through 10. Each zone was depicted as a different brightness value in the final photographic print. Zone 0 was completely black and Zone 10 was completely white. Each zone in between had a difference of 1 stop. The zone system provided a way to visualize and to some degree quantify a relationship between exposure and these zones on photographic paper. Robert Fisher proposed a method to use the basic lights and darks luminosity selections to create an 11-step zone system for digital photography. For the most part, these digital zones are created by subtracting adjacent luminosity selections. For example, a lights 3 subtracted from a lights 2. Mask subtraction is an important technique described in Tony's written tutorials and also demonstrated in my complete guide to luminosity mask videos. But mask subtraction can also be time-consuming. Fortunately, the newest panel automatically does the subtractions for you when you click any of the off-center midtone buttons. The line containing the numbers from 1 through 9 in the Spectrum tab have buttons for creating the various zone selections using Fisher's method. But that's only 9 zones, and Ansel Adams' zone system has 11. In the traditional zone system, Zone 0 represents pure black in print, and Zone 10 is pure white. It's not possible to have a luminosity mask select just one tone with no feathering. The closest that can be approximated is the Darks 5 selection for Zone 0 and Lights 5 selection for Zone 10. Since these buttons are already present on the Spectrum tab, they're not duplicated in the line containing Zones 1 through 9. I'll also point out that Zone 5 and Midtone 1 both make the same selection, but that zone is duplicated in the zone masks. Because they're so narrow in terms of the tone selected, the zone selections will not show marching ants, because no pixels are more than 50% selected. But a selection is verified by the selection indicator on the panel, and the new selection channel will also be present in the channels panel. You can also use the View button to view the red overlay of a zone mask selection. It's important to note that the traditional zone system and digital zone masks in Photoshop have differences both in terms of the actual tones they describe and in their overall application to photography. With regard to the tones selected, zone masks aren't as precise as the zone system descriptions might suggest. The self-feathering nature of luminosity masks means that the selected tones are feathered into adjacent tones. I'll use the plus-minus zones button to generate all the zone masks in the channels panel so that we can see how the tones overlap. For example, with the Zone 7 selection, selected tones taper significantly into Zone 6 on the dark side and Zones 8 and 9 on the light side. Zone 5, which is the same as the basic midtone selection, is also much broader than just a strictly designated Zone 5 tone might suggest. Zone 5 selections will appear to affect Zones 3 through 7 somewhat, even though middle gray will be selected the most. In the written manual for the V4 panel, which you can find in the TK Actions download folder, Tony includes an image which shows color and texture varying across the tonal spectrum and a corresponding chart which shows the parts of this image that are selected by each zone. This can provide a sense of how color, brightness, and texture are captured by different zone selections. You can reference this chart if you want to get a detailed visual of what each zone selects. Moving beyond the basic subtractions for zone masks, the V4 panel can also create an additional series of selections with center points approximately halfway between the center points of the zone selections. These half zones are on the line of buttons on the Spectrum tab above the standard zone mask. The Alt 5 button in this line creates an alternate Zone 5 selection. It's still centered on middle gray, but it's narrower than the selection produced by the Midtones 1 and Zone 5 buttons. It has a higher degree of selection for tones closer to the midpoint and is less feathered into the surrounding tones, even though the button is wider on the panel due to the name. In practice, the use of zone masks in Photoshop is quite different than using the traditional zone system when developing film. The zone mask should just be thought of as luminosity selections with very narrow tonal ranges. They're used like any other luminosity selection to adjust, blend, brush in, or tweak the selected tones. The limited tonal range of zone masks allows for very precise and incremental adjustments. Zone masks can be used independently, but it's also possible and sometimes necessary to do a series of adjustments to different zones to achieve the desired contrast and brightness in the image. For specific instruction in my zone mask techniques, check out the Complete Guide to Luminosity Masks video series. The basic darks, lights, and midtone buttons are great for selecting and adjusting larger tonal ranges. The zone and half zone buttons make it possible to select and adjust very narrow off-center tonal ranges for extremely precise and incremental adjustments. In the next chapter, we'll look at the multi-zone masks, which provide a combination of the two.